I'd like to call to order the Placer County Planning Commission for Thursday, June 10th. If everyone would rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Good morning. We have Mr. Cannon is absent. Mr. DiMattei.
Here.
Mr. Johnson is absent. Mr. Woodward.
Here.
Mr. Herzog.
Here.
Mr. Sevison.
Larry, you're muted. I think his speak. Hey, Larry. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, Mr. Sevison is present, and Mr. Hauge.
Yeah, here.
Thank you.
All right. Welcome, everyone. It's important for Placer County to conduct our business to ensure essential services for our citizens. We're doing everything we can to facilitate residents staying at home and physical distancing. We encourage the public to engage in the process. With that in mind, our public comment for this meeting will be offered in person and through a remote virtual process. Citizens who wish to comment today should be prepared to comment via the Zoom platform. To join virtually online, click on the link in the Planning Commission homepage. Please make sure your microphone is muted. You may also call in using the toll-free numbers to hear the meeting at 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247. And please enter the webinar ID 291-2416-8492. Please press *6 to mute yourself. If you would like to make public comment virtually, please raise your hand with a hand icon at the bottom of the page. If you are calling in, please press *9 to raise your hand. Please be prepared to speak at the time I open public comment for the specific item you would like to address, which may include public comment for matters not included on the agenda, a consent item, or a timed item. If attending in person today, we kindly request that once you have commented in your item, return to your seat or leave the hearing room from the exit-only door to accommodate for physical distancing, and allow for others to provide in-person public comment. Each commenter is entitled to 3 minutes to comment. Thank you for your patience as we work to preserve the safety and health of all meeting participants and ensure that each citizen who wishes to comment has the opportunity to do so. So at this time, if EJ, you would give the planning director's report.
Thank you. Counselor, did you have something to say? Or no? Okay. You're getting ready there. Thank you, Chairman. EJ Valdi, Planning Services Division. Real quick project updates. This past Tuesday, the Board of Supervisors considered the AT&T cell tower. The board ended up taking tentative action to uphold the appeal and deny the cellular facility. They ended up continuing the item to June 22nd, and that was to provide staff time to prepare findings for denial and then bring that back to the board for final action. So that happened on Tuesday. The next board meeting is June 22nd. That's when the Matranga appeal is scheduled for.
Were there any comments as to why they did that, or?
Well, there was overwhelming public comment, in non-support of the cell facility. Mm-hmm. I don't think there was anybody that showed up. Clayton was there as well that spoke for the proposal. But just I think there was just an overwhelming lack of support for that project. So June 22nd, as I would mention, Matranga appeal is scheduled for the board, and then July 6th is the Baseline Commercial Center. Will be on that board hearing. For upcoming Planning Commission schedule, I know the next meeting, June 24th, I was warning you ahead of time that it was going to be a full day. Since that time, we've been looking at all the bigger planning efforts and projects that are coming our way, and also we polled all of you for your schedules to figure out when all of these are going to line up. So I did spread things out a bit. So June 24th, we're going to just have a couple items on that. That will be the first redistricting meeting. with the county's redistricting process. And then we also have another rezone project up in the Colfax area. So it won't be a full day, or not planned to be a full day on that date, but we did split things up. And then there will be meetings in July, so both July 8th and July 22nd. Some of the bigger items, besides the redistricting process, housing code amendments will be coming forward at some time. The health and safety element, which we've had a workshop with your commission before, will be coming ahead. We'll have a Brown Act and ethics overview and training for the commission, and then there's various land development projects coming up as well. So that's our plan for now.
On the 24th, is that a public hearing on the redistricting, or is it just informational?
Public hearing, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. So public is invited
Okay.
and encouraged to come.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the staff? All right. I will now open the public comment for any matters not on the Planning Commission agenda. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak? And Sue, is there anyone online? Okay.
Mr. Garabedian, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Commissioners. Mike Garabedian with Placer County Tomorrow. Actually, I wanted to speak to the last agenda item, the Director's Report. Is this the proper time to do that?
Yes.
Thank you. I did not participate in the AT&T hearing, though I did watch and observe it. What I would add is that of course, each item that comes before the Commission has criteria and findings that must be met, a list of them in the municipal code. And what the presentation I heard there, among other things, had a very detailed description for each of the findings about why that project did not meet the findings. It was probably the most detailed report I've seen on any issue, whether from the staff or the public, including myself. It was a remarkable description of exactly how that project does not fit the requirement that were sought. So, and that could very well be the explanation of why the staff needs time to write up findings to meet those findings. But in any event, there's an opportunity, of course, to watch that presentation yourselves. I just wanted to say that, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Are there any other comments online? No? With no other comment, the public comments for matters not on the agenda is closed. We now move on to the consent agenda. Would anyone or any of the commissioners like to remove the item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, does anyone from the public want to remove the item from the consent agenda? First of all, in the audience? Seeing none? Sue, anyone online? No. All right, in that case, then I would accept the motion.
I move that we accept the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a first and a second. Sue, roll call, please.
I have a first from Mr. Woodward, a second from Mr. Herzog, so a vote from Mr. DiMattei, please.
Yes.
Mr. Woodward,
Yes.
Mr. Herzog,
Yes.
Mr. Sevison,
Yes.
and Mr. Hauge.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. We are moving into our first timed item, the Kim Conditional Use Permit Modification, third-party appeal. Members of the public may now raise their hands, press, star 9 if you are calling in to begin queuing in for public comment on this item, which will not begin until the item presentation is complete. Amy Rosig, Associate Planner, will be presenting the item. So, Amy?
Good morning, Chairman and members of the Commission. My name is Amy Rosseg with the Placer County Planning Services Division. As you mentioned, the project that I have before you this morning is a third-party appeal of the zoning administrator's approval of a conditional use permit modification in this project we call the Kim project. Project site is located at 5960 Barton Ranch Court in the Granite Bay community If you were to come off of Interstate 80 and take Douglas Boulevard, you would make a left onto Barton Road, and about a half a mile up the road is this Barton Ranch subdivision community. The project site is zoned single-family residential with a combining agriculture, and a combining minimum building site of 40,000 square feet, and a combining plan development of 1 dwelling unit per acre. And I outlined the subdivision that this project site is located in this green box here, and all of the properties in the subdivision are under that zoning district, and the surrounding area is zoned with the base zoning district of single-family residential, but this is the only area with the combined plan development zoning district. So the Barton Ranch subdivision was approved by the Board of Supervisors back in 2018, and this request was for a tentative subdivision to create the 10-lot subdivision with 2 open space lots, and it was a rezone to add the planned development and for a conditional use permit. Now here's an aerial of the project site and this community. This aerial came from Google Earth and was taken last year. Right now, all that there is that has been improved is the road. There are no other houses in this community right now, but it is surrounded by other single-family residences. So in January this year, we received a request to increase the lot coverage percentage on this property. The request was to change the lot coverage percentage from 20% to 23% in order to allow the construction of 2 covered patios, a covered porch, and a future shade structure. The future shade structure is not shown on this site plan because the property owner wants to move into the property, and once they've settled in, they want to eventually construct the shade structure. But they have shown us where the garage would be located along the front of the property in the narrower part of the property. And then they're proposing their residence behind the garage, and they're also proposing a swimming pool on the property as well. There are some development standards that I do want to make you aware of with this particular lot. So when the Barton Ranch subdivision was approved, there are conditions of approval that limit this particular lot, we call this lot number 4, and the parcel to the west, which is lot number 5. These 2 lots out of the 10-lot subdivision are limited to be single-story. The other 8 remaining houses are allowed to have 2 stories, but these particular lots are limited to 1 story, and that height limit is also equivalent to 25 feet. So the property owners are proposing a single-story residence. The maximum height with the pitch of the roof is going to be 20 feet. They are proposing a chimney, which would go up to 25 feet, but they're still maintaining that 1-story requirement. There's also a 20-foot rear setback for structures from this property, and then there's a 10-foot setback for pools. But there's also, in addition to those requirements, there's a 10-foot landscaping easement located along the rear of the property, and the conditions of approval state that when this property was developed, the landscaping easement also has to be developed with some sort of evergreen, bushes, and trees, and it also has to complement the existing oak trees that are there, and those shall be preserved. And it also states that there's no pool decking, no pavement, no structures that are allowed in this landscaping easement. So the swimming pool is proposed to be about 15 feet from the rear property line, so that way the pool decking stays out of this landscaping easement. So the zoning administrator hearing was held in March of this year, and prior to the zoning administrator hearing, we did receive 1 letter from the public, which was from the appellants. The letter stated that the project would be precedent setting, as this was the first home to be built in this subdivision, that this would create a square footage advantage compared to other lots in the subdivision, and it provided history as to why Lot 4 was limited to a single story. During the hearing, we received 2 comments. The appellant spoke in objection to the request and reiterated the points that they raised in their letter. And they also stated that this project should be a variance instead of a use permit modification. We also received a public comment from Sandra Harris, who provided more history on the subdivision and stated that it would be precedent setting as it was the first residence in this development. Prior to the zoning administrator rendering his decision, he explained that the project was not a variance but a conditional use permit modification, and as such, the findings are not the same. Prior to the zoning administrator rendering his decision, he explained that the project was not a variance because there are special circumstances that are required to be found for a variance, such as site, topography, shape, location, and surrounding areas. And in comparison, a conditional use permit modification, it has to be shown that it's consistent with the county code, the general plan, the community plan, and that the maintenance and operation would not affect the health, safety, and welfare of those residing nearby, that the modification is consistent with the surrounding neighborhood, and that it will not increase traffic or generate more adverse effects to the neighborhood. So the zoning administrator determined that the increase in lot coverage would not be noticeable to adjacent parcels, and that the home would be still limited to a single story, and it would meet all setback requirements. And he also explained that through this process, they could request up to 40% lot coverage requirement, which is the lot coverage in the single-family residential zoning district, the base zoning district, but because this is in a planned development, it is limited to 20%. They're requesting 3% increase, which is a minor deviation from the planned development limit. So with that, the zoning administrator approved the request. And then on March 24th of this year, we received a letter of appeal from the zoning administrator's decision filed by Thomas Hillsland and Holly Johnson. And their appeal letter contains 6 points. And the first one is that there is no designated authority of the zoning administrator to approve or deny a conditional use permit modification. They further cite section 17.06.3030 of the zoning ordinance, which states that the authority of the zoning administrators to approve minor use permits and variances, but it does not talk about modifications to use permits. However, section 1754.090 of the code states that planned developments may be modified for height, lot coverage, and setbacks by the zoning administrator through a use permit modification. But for the zoning administrator to make those modifications, there are criteria that has to be met, such as the changes affect no more than 4 lots. So in this particular case, they're only requesting it for 1 lot. That the modification does not result in a larger structure than would otherwise be constructed in the base zoning district. In this case, they're requesting 23% lot coverage. They could go up to 40% in the base zoning district of single-family residential. And 3, that the proposed structure does not violate any CC&Rs, and that the use permit findings can be made, which go back to findings for that's consistent with the county code, the community plan, that would not have any adverse effect. The second point of their appeal is that the request is not a modification to a conditional use permit. They state that there are no provisions within the conditions of approval of the use permit regarding the lot coverage for Lot 4, and therefore this cannot be a modification. However, the Barton Ranch subdivision was approved with a planned residential development in accordance with the county code, and there's a table in the county code which outlines the requirements and the restrictions for lot coverage, which is where we get the lot coverage requirement for this lot. Their third point is that Lot 4 is seeking a variance. However, as we've outlined, the county code states that this would be a modification to a use permit and not a variance. Number 4 is that there is no justification to support a variance. In their letter of appeal, they cite Topanga Association for a Scenic Community versus the County of Los Angeles, which held that a party seeking a variance must demonstrate findings which could support a variance. And further, the appellant outlines that there are no special circumstances to support a variance. However, with a conditional use permit modification, the findings are different. And number 5 is that the modified conditional use permit is not within the legal parameters. The appellant contends that the request is constructed as a conditional use permit. It does not pass the test to grant the request. They cite Heston Heights Association versus the Board of Supervisors, which contends that a use permit may be permitted if it shows that it's essential and desirable to the public conveyance. However, the county code does not require us to make findings for public conveyance, but we do require to look at the health, safety, and general welfare, which is what the zoning administrator reviewed during their approval. And last is that this would be precedent setting. And during the appellant's letter stated that since this is the first lot in the subdivision and Lot 5 is under similar constraints with the 1 story, that Lot 5 could come in the future and also request a deviation for the lot coverage. And the zoning administrator explained that lot coverage requirements are reviewed on a case-by-case basis, and if Lot 5 did come in, the parameters would be examined at that time. It's also at this point in their appeal letter where they state concern over the location of the swimming pool and the future shade structure, which is the future shade structure is not shown on the site plan. So staff met separately with the property owners and the appellants following receipt of the appeal letter to discuss the future shade structure. And it was during that time that we discussed possibly limiting the height of the future shade structure to 13 feet. And this has been discussed with both parties, and both parties have agreed to a compromise. So this is the voluntary resolution that the Development Review Commission is proposing to the Planning Commission today. Before I go into my recommendation, I do want to mention that we did receive 3 letters. One was from Defend Granite Bay, which was reiterating some of the appeal points which were brought up in the appellant's letter. And then we received another letter from Cheryl Berkema and Scott Vaughn, which were in support of the appeal. However, after review of those appeal letters, staff is still supporting the following recommendation, which is that the Planning Commission find the project categorically exempt and to deny the appeal, uphold the zoning administrator's approval of the conditional use permit modification, and approve the modification with the conditions of approval restricting the height limit of the shade structure to 13 feet.
All right. Does anyone have questions for staff? All right. At this time, is the applicant here or online to make a presentation? I'm sorry, the appellant or applicant, both.
I'm sorry.
Let's start with the applicant. And nope. And then in case the appellant, please.
Good morning. I'm Holly Johnson.
And I'm Tom Hillisland. Thank you.
So we filed the appeal, and from what Ms. Rossig had stated is that the parties had voluntarily reached a resolution. The county still feels a certain way. We still feel a certain way, the opposite, but in the interest of moving forward, we do agree with having the shade structure be limited to the 13 feet in height, and that be within the designated setbacks when it wasn't listed before. As we're agreeing to disagree, so to speak, and to resolve it, our belief is there doesn't need to be a decision issued by the Planning Commission. If you are to issue a decision and say that the zoning administrator's action was appropriate, that it is modified CUP, XYZ as put forth in the staff report, it undermines, so to speak, the settlement or the resolution between the parties. It also doesn't finalize the matter. It allows a further appeal. Our thought is that if something else comes up within this planning, within Barton Ranch, within a different lot or something else, that fight could be fought another day. If there is a decision issued by the Planning Commission, it just further has the ball rolling, so to speak. So if the conditions to Lot 4 are approved, such as the shade structure is within the 20-foot rear setback, or cannot be within the 20-foot rear setback, and the other setbacks as designated within the conditions of approval within the Barton Ranch development, and the shade structure is limited to 13 feet in height, then we would not proceed with our appeal. We're not withdrawing the appeal because the appeal was filed. We just would not be proceeding with it. What the Planning Commission can do is, because the parties have sought or have obtained a resolution, that the appeal is effectively moot, that you don't have to go forward, that you do not issue a decision on the merits of what was put forth. For the record, we're going to incorporate, without reiterating all the points we've already submitted, incorporate by reference the file that we had submitted based upon our oral arguments, based upon the testimony before the zoning administrator, based upon the testimony today, the written documents and statements put forth by third party and interested individuals as well. We expressly reserve the right, in the event that the Planning Commission, yourselves, decide not to agree to these conditions, if there is going to be a further appeal, we we reserve the right to submit any additional arguments in the event there is an appeal or in any third-party action.
Yeah, she's did a good job of explaining a lot of the details. Just a couple things I'd like to point out. First, I'd just like to thank the applicant, the Kims, for being understanding of our concerns and the situation, and the staff, of course, your support in helping coordinate that. Really appreciate that. I think it's probably already well documented. If you haven't read about it, there's been a lot of history to the efforts that we put into this 3 or 4 years ago, whatever it was. And so that was why when things started to change, after we had gone through a large effort, extensive effort to come to some resolution or, compromise, if you will, back in the day. And so when things started happening and they wanted to make changes beyond it, it starts setting up flags for us. So whether you call it a conditional use permit or modification, whatever you want to call it, the concern for precedent setting is there. There's been arguments made about, it's a single story, so we should be able to get more. Well, that's why it was in the agreement, the way it was set up that way. It was specifically for that reason. So the buyers knew that when they were going into it. So it's something to keep in mind. And these are all things that have already been discussed, and maybe this stage is not as appropriate, but I did want to emphasize that there's been history here and, a lot of interest. And so we just want to make sure that gets across. But at the end of the day, we're happy with the conditions of approval as long as those get basically accepted here and recorded, if you will. And I'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
And you might not be aware, but we were involved as well as our neighbors in the initial approval of this project, because where Barton Ranch sits, it's higher in elevation than our neighbors and ourselves. And that's why Lot 4 and Lot 5 were designated to be single-story only, and to have a further restriction from the setback, so they would not be encroaching, any development would not be encroaching on those existing property owners. Also, just a note for the record that this residence is not similar in characteristics to the surrounding areas. So if there was a CUP approval, it would interfere with the health, safety, and welfare of the existing neighbors, and it's not in character of what's already there. So we don't need to get into all of the specifics. You don't have to issue a decision based upon this, deny the appeal, uphold the zoning administrator's approval, because it's not needed as the parties have reached a resolution. You can say that based upon the resolution or the settlement, however you wish to term it, that the appeal is not needed. It would be rendered moot, and then the conditions of approval to Lot 4 restrictions, the 13-foot maximum elevation of that shade structure, and within the designated setbacks already within the conditions of approval for Barton Ranch, then we would be satisfied. Are there any questions we could ask?
I actually have a question, if it'd be okay.
Yep, please.
So I believe I understand your point of view. I just was hoping for one point of clarification, and that is, so a conditional use permit is a discretionary approval. In the event that the Planning Commission or the county as a whole were to modify that conditional use permit, that modification itself would be subject to review and could be appealed. So I guess in trying to get to where you're accomplishing or what you're hoping to get to in terms of modifying the conditions of approval, if the county were to modify the conditions of approval, that by itself is an appealable action that would need some sort of formal action by the Planning Commission. If you're interested in reaching some sort of private agreement, you can certainly do that, and that would not need the county's assistance. The only downside of that is that it would not be contained within the condition of approval, and therefore would not be enforceable by the county. So I guess what I'm getting at is basically if you are interested in having the conditions of approval modified as you have requested with the 13-foot height requirement and compliance with the setbacks, you can certainly do that. It's just in order to do that, the Planning Commission will need to make some sort of determination along those lines, assuming that the Planning Commission is on board with those modifications, and that by its nature would be appealable.
I understand what you're saying. Our understanding was coming to this hearing, and I don't see it in what was in the record, but I understand what you're saying. Our opinion was that when we were coming to this hearing, that there would be the modifications to the conditional use permit for Lot 4. That would be before the Planning Commission. I understand it's an appealable action. Our position is, if those restrictions are put forth, the appeal would not be coming from us. We would be satisfied with what would be happening to Lot 4. Does that make sense? And if you're saying that you have to have, if it's not before, is it not before this body, then our appeal can be stayed.
Right. So I guess there's two options. One, the Planning Commission can say the appeal is moot or removed, in which case then the Planning Commission wouldn't be entertaining a modification of the conditions of approval.
So then it wouldn't be moot. We don't want to withdraw the appeal at this juncture. So what are you suggesting as to how we could reach the end result?
So I guess there's two options. One would be to enter into a private agreement, having the Planning Commission dismiss this as moot, which it sounds like you're not interested in.
No, that had been brought forward, and I don't mean to interrupt you, that it would be a condition going forward with the land, that it wasn't going to be, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, right? That it was not going to be a private, it would be set forth in the conditions.
And so if that's the primary interest, then you'd be asking the Planning Commission to make that modification to the use permit to include those conditions in,
Correct.
Which by its nature could be appealed, and there's just nothing we can do about that on our side.
I understand.
Assuming the Commission was interested in modifying the conditions.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions of the Commission of the appellant?
I just, I thought that was great dialogue, but I did not get the answer.
Sure. Yeah. So let me just I guess take a shot at clarifying it. You can tell me if I jumble it. But basically, their request is that this commission modify the condition of approval to include the 13-foot height requirement and to require compliance with the setback requirements
For Lot 4.
For Lot
4. Right. So that's their request, and that would be to the commission. If the commission is interested in doing that, that would be the action that they would take, which by its nature would be appealable to the Board of Supervisors. They've requested that it not be appealable, but it's just that's not physically possible if you're going to modify the conditions.
Let me clarify. I'm not requesting that anything not be appealable. I'm saying that we would not be going forward with our appeal. What anyone else does is not within our prerogative.
I think what you're saying, I just want to make sure I understand. So what you're saying is if we went forward and they did approve this condition of approval, at that point, somebody else come back in and appeal what we...
Right,
and that's okay.
And it would be legally permissible for you to as well. I understand that you're not interested in it, and that's totally within your rights. I just, by its nature, once we modify the conditional use permit, then there would be appeal.
Right.
The same thing would go forward. Is it whatever the body decides, Planning Commission decides, would be appealable? Whether you deny our appeal, that's appealable. Anything.
Right. The only exception would be if you withdrew your appeal and entered into a private agreement. In that situation, then this hearing body wouldn't have any kind of role in things.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Is that any clarification for you, Commissioner Woodward?
Right, I do understand that. I have an additional question as well, but
go ahead.
I'll yield for. Well, several of the letters here, and you've expressed concern about this as well in terms of precedent. I guess that is a concern of mine as well. If we're going to modify this, are we not establishing a precedent? I admit that we can look at each one on an individual basis, but are we not establishing a precedent for this community, which has yet to break ground on any property? I mean, it makes it very difficult to defend a position of, let's say the Kims establish their residence here, and then someone comes in next door and wants to essentially do the same thing, and the Kims have a problem with that. It would be almost impossible for us to defend the Kims' property rights under those circumstances, since we have modified the circumstances for the Kims in the first place. It would seem to me. I don't know whether this is a legal question or just a general question, but it's a concern, I think, for this particular community. Is it not?
May I provide an additional information?
I'd love to hear your views, yeah.
that was one of our main appeals. Is reason why to file the appeal was that it would be precedent setting, that it was seeking a variance, and we have the differences of whether it's a variance or modified CUP with the county. But what I wanted to bring forward is ground has been broken on this development since the staff report has filed. If you go into Barton Ranch, I don't recall which lot numbers they are, but on the left-hand side, lots 2 and 3 have both broken ground, and one is, lack of a better term, it's already structured, has roofing and plywood. They have not requested any type of variance or setbacks or modification, whatever. I'm not trying to offend anyone with whatever terms I use. The one right next to it, I believe, is lot 3, has also broken ground. So it's not, I don't know if it would be opening a door for all these different lots to seek variances. It seems like there has already been development where people are not seeking requests to modify the existing conditions. But we do have a concern, lot 5, and we don't file appeals or bring forth or argue based on only what's in our backyard. I have been before this commission before on other matters, or have filed, submitted letters and correspondence to the board of supervisors on different projects within Placer County because of whether or not I believe it's adhering to our community plan or for whatever reason. So we do have a concern that it not be precedent setting, but we have seen in writing from the county that the county's position is that it's not precedent setting. So I don't know if I answered.
I just would like to clarify. I believe the modification at issue here is for a lot coverage to change from 20% to 23%.
Correct.
So there isn't a question or issue in terms of setbacks necessarily before the commission.
The reason why it came up for setbacks is what was submitted by the applicant shows the increase from 20 to 23% for the covered shade structures, which would be over the existing footprint, but that it's specified or requested based upon a future shade structure, and nowhere in it did it specify where the location of that shade structure would be, and that was our concern. Right. Is where you're going to put, or what it would look like. Where are you going to put that when it's higher in elevation to our existing properties? And right behind this, lot 4 is not in our backyard; it's in our neighbor's backyard. They have 2-acre property that have been there for 30 years. The one next to it is, I believe, 2 acres as well. It's been there. Ours are half an acre. The ones behind are half an acre. And it affects our other neighbor, not us as much. We are a corner lot, but we filed because we had met with the county and done all these items to resolve it, and we're wondering why 3 years later are we seeking all these deviations from what we had agreed to in good faith. And quite frankly, we were irritated that we had to file an appeal at all from having spent all the time and effort to get forward to where we were. With that being said, we are happy that the county has reached a resolution with us, as well as the applicant, because we don't want to be difficult neighbors. We understand if you have property, that you develop it within the parameters that are set forth. You bought the land knowing it was a single-story property. These are the designated setbacks, fit within the parameters. We are not against building. We're against deviating without justification.
Don, did you have additional questions?
No, I don't.
Okay.
So going back to what Clayton was saying is that I don't see anything that you guys are agreeing to the 21%, which was going to be just the addition to the patio that they want to add on to their house?
It wasn't just the patio.
I understand there's a shade structure involved as well.
The square footage included the shade structures.
In the 23%?
Correct.
From what I read, just the addition to the house with the covered patio would bring it to 21%. Are you guys agreeing to that as well, or did you come to an agreement that you would have just this shade structure? Because I don't see any of that in your agreements with your neighbor.
We are agreeing that the Kims can do their increase to their lot coverage on that specific.
To the 23, to increase it?
23%.
Okay.
Correct. And we're agreeing to that because we reached an agreement. Not that we agree overall within the Barton Ranch to increase percentages of the different properties. It's reaching a resolution. It's not that the county agrees with our position that we think it's a variance. It's not that the county agrees with us. It's not that we agree with everything that is set forth. It's that the Kims had filed their request to increase it from 22 to 23% and a future shade structure. The way we're reaching in the agreement is that we will do the limitations to the shade structure of the 13 feet and the designated setbacks. They can still do their 20 to 23%. Do we agree with it in principle? No. Are we reaching a resolution? Yes.
Are the, sorry about that. You said all parties, you're not the only party. Is it all the parties within that 10 lot subdivision involved in this appeal, or just people who live behind them?
We are the named appellants. We have.
I understand that, but you also say that you're not the only parties and neighbors involved.
Correct.
Who are the other neighbors involved? Are they backyards, or are they in that subdivision
They're
of the
the
10?
properties that I referenced. Backyards.
Backyards,
They're
okay.
the properties that are affected by the lot.
But not the
Existing
people that are,
properties.
the existing properties, not the
Existing
people that
properties.
are already starting to build in this
Correct.
little cul-de-sac.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to clarify. Thank
Correct.
you.
Existing properties, not anyone
good
within
point.
Barton Ranch.
Okay. Also, you said that if he changed the architecture of his house, it was going to have a health and safety, a well-being of people. How does that have a health and safety issue if
I
somebody
was
changes
just-
the architecture of their house?
I was just questioning because I don't believe I referenced architecture of the house. I meant this.
You said if they add on to their house, it would be a health and safety issue. I was just wondering how that would have a health
I'm
issue
not-
to somebody to add on to their house.
I'll clarify. Where the placement of the pool shade structure would go, if it was encroaching, if there is not the limitation on that aspect, and if you're increasing, the lot size of that home is much larger than what is in the existing area. That is drastically different. I believe one of the conditions or justifications for doing a modified CUP is whether it's in nature of the existing community. That size of the property is not within the nature of the existing community. It's drastically larger than what's in existence. And if you are to put a shade structure on the property line at a higher elevation with existing properties that have a lot of square footage and in the space of land, privacy, that encroaches unreasonable interference with rights of privacy. That's my point. If I said architecture, I apologize, not what I meant, not the architecture of the house. It's the size in comparison to the existing properties, and not just ours, the other, all around it, and how it would interfere if you were to have a structure right here in the neighborhood of our existing backyard that's when we've been there for years, and everyone else.
Well, according to where they're putting the footprint to this house, they could move it back 10 feet, which would be where that shade structure seems to be if they want to put it in the pool, because they're still within their lot line.
They couldn't, because the setback for lots 3, 4, and 5, or at least 4 and 5.
Is 30 feet, right?
So they couldn't do it within 20 feet. 10 foot is a landscape easement that runs with the land.
Right.
So the house could not be within, it'd have to be 30-foot setback. So when it was all approved, it was designated to be a single-story lot, as well as further back, because the county and the developer of this project, as well as ourselves, and the other neighbors who are not here, agreed that that would be a reasonable restriction on the land to not interfere with our existing rights.
Okay. So you guys are agreeing to let them have their 23% to do their, I want to clarify that because it's not clarified to me. Maybe it is to everybody else, but, so you agreed with the,
Basically,
We are.
what they call the shading structures that are kind of attached to the house, the little alcoves and stuff, right? That's what we're talking
Correct.
about. Yeah, that we're going to be okay with. Initially, of course, that was, beginning of our concern, but we're willing to compromise on that for this lot. But the shade structure, we just didn't know anything about, so that's why we're trying.
And it would have been a
Clarify.
granting of, you can build this shade structure, but there would have been no further recourse. They could put it where they wanted, it would go before a building permit, and it would be done.
so EJ is the shade structure, not the shade structure, but the covered patio attached to the house. Is this going to be part of the building permit when they apply for their building permit to build this house, or is this going to have to come separate?
It's separate, EJ. It's separate.
I'm not sure what building permit was submitted, or if there's a building permit
Is there-
submitted for this
yeah.
house yet.
The shade structure or the patio? But doesn't the house permit include, doesn't that patio structure go into goes into 21% from the numbers that I thought I read, but I'm dyslexic, so I could be wrong too. So I just want to clarify that. Because we're talking about a shade structure that's going to be over the pool, and we're also talking about a patio that's attached to the house.
Right,
which brought it up to 21%.
right. Yeah, so with the covered patios and the porches, that brings it up to 21%. And then the future shade structure is what bumps it up to the 23%.
Okay.
Am I following along?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
because they were, I don't know if they agreed on both. I'm just hearing that they agreed with their shade structure, not knowing where it's going to go. So I just want to make sure.
Any other questions?
Yeah, wouldn't it be assumed that the shade structure would be built within the setbacks? Yeah, wouldn't it be assumed already?
Yes.
So that would already be reviewed, and I understand the concern that, future shade structure could be built and that not being defined and someone not being aware of those limitations. And so I'm just, surprised that we have an appeal, because I think it was already assumed that the shade structure would have been built within the setback, which you guys are okay with. So I'm just a little confused about.
Can I add on to what you were saying? So the future shade structure also would trigger a building permit, and during that building permit review process, we look at lot coverage, setbacks, height. So that is it. And then we do have an inspector that goes out there and verifies it in the field. So it is reviewed several times to ensure that it is meeting the requirements.
Is there an architect review committee for that shade structure, or could they just go to Costco and buy a big old tent and put it in their backyard and call it a shade structure? And then it'd be ugly. I mean, if they can't get their shade structure. Just trying to play devil's advocate here. So I would think their neighbors want to see something that's appealing and get through that process now.
Yeah. So this height limit of 13 feet did, this number was generated through discussions with their architect, and he said that the height of the existing, the porches on the house are about 10 feet, and with a roof structure it would be about an overall height of 13 feet. So that way it was similar in height to the house, and it did complement the house, so that way it wouldn't be an eyesore.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions of the commission? Just a minute, Amy. I want to go back. Why do we need a variance of, I go back, I don't like, not a variance, I'm sorry, conditional use permit, but there was an agreement. They bought the lot knowing what the coverage was. So what is their justification increasing coverage? I have an issue of coming in and changing the coverage. What's the good reason?
So, that's an excellent question, and the findings are different, so they didn't have to provide us with special circumstances like they would for a variance. In that regards, it kind of more falls under aesthetics, and that they would like covered patios and porches on their residence.
It goes back, as a commissioner, I look at people who have negotiated, they've come to agreement, this landowner bought it knowing exactly what the requirements were. So I have an issue of granting that conditional use permit modification. I really do. As EJ knows, I don't.
No, Chairman, the only thing I would add is, so when this subdivision was approved, there were just a few lots, I don't know what lots specifically, Amy probably knows that, were limited to single-story construction.
Right.
And it was going back to the original approvals and the concern of the neighbors about those lots that face those residential properties that were already there. So there were single-story restrictions. Everything else in that subdivision is allowed to go two-story, and whenever you have a single-story home, it takes up more lot coverage than a typical two-story home. So that, I think that came into the equation as well. But here in this situation, the home they did design, even the home itself with the attached patios exceeds the 20%, right? It's 21%, and then they're asking for that additional 2% to get to 23 for the shade structure. So yeah, they are asking for something above and beyond what was approved, but with a single-story structure, those obviously take up a bigger footprint than a two-story. So.
And that wasn't thought about when the conditional use permit was approved?
Well, good point, right? Because those discussions happen during the hearing, right? And not probably, during those public hearings, not all the thought goes into what the consequence of those compromises are, and maybe this was one of those compromises. But it's just for the house and the shade structure, that 1% of coverage difference is pretty minimal. So could adjustments be made either way to either meet it or not,
How many square feet is 1% that we're talking about, the 21% and the 23%?
10, yeah.
Okay.
Just for the patio,
Not the shade structure.
not the
Right.
shade structure.
All right.
But if you look at, according to the parameters in this subdivision, if you're greater than 29,000 square feet, you can only build up to less than 6,000 square feet. But if you're at 2999, you can go to 21%, which gives you a 6,200 square foot house. So it just doesn't seem like everything was laid out right, because now if I have a smaller lot, I could build a 300 square foot lot, house bigger. So there probably should have been some kind of variance for that number on a larger lot. So that was the only two that I saw that increase in square footage in.
All right. Any other questions of staff or applicant or appellant? Any online?
I want to say one more, possible?
Yes, that's possible.
And so I just wanted to emphasize the point you made about, they knew what they were buying. They should have been aware of that. Now, we're not saying we're going to go back and say, no, we're not going to like this. It's okay. We're okay with what we've basically come to an agreement on. But I just want to make sure you guys are all aware of that and keep your antennas up as things proceed, not just at this particular development, but let's avoid having this be a pattern as we move forward in other developments in the future. So just because what you brought up was a perfect point and exactly what first thing that came to my mind when we started this whole process was like, hey, they knew what they were getting. Why are they asking for more? So again, it does seem what they're asking for doesn't seem like that big a deal, frankly. And, I feel for them because they want to add this little enhancement. And I really appreciate that they've been sensitive to our concerns and work with us. And so I really thank them for that. But anyway, just put it on your radar, because these are things that we're looking out for as a community, is making sure that we're being consistent and stick to the plan, basically, as much as possible.
I just don't see how we can restrict other property owners in this subdivision and hold them to a standard that we waive today. Right. This is a slippery slope, it seems to me. While I commend the fact that you have worked with the Kims bought this property knowing what they were getting. And it's going to be, to me, it seems almost impossible, even though we have apparently two property owners that have already broken ground and they haven't asked for any waivers, but, tomorrow they could come in with some requests, right? How can we hold them accountable as property owners to the provisions that exist for this? And where do we stop? Is 24% okay? Because 23 was. It's just a really interesting slippery slope, I think.
Does this property face the west, where that's why they want this not shade structure, but patio cover off their house, so it's going to stay cooler? Is it because, is there...
North. Front of the house faces north.
So then the back of the house would face the south? Right, okay. So there could be some sun heat issues in their backyard.
Yeah, but frankly, when you think about the angle of the sun coming from the south, that shade structure, unless it was up against the fence.
Well, I'm not talking about the shade structure. I don't care right now about the shade structure. I
Yeah.
care about the addition to their house.
Right.
Just that part. If they want to have a little patio that's only going to take up 1%, still, like my colleagues have said, they're asking for something that they knew wasn't there.
Yeah.
So maybe we're all trying to come to a compromise. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm asking this question. Is it
pretty much
a location issue that they probably want some shade because it's going to be 110 degrees in their backyard one day? Off their house, not off their pool.
Can't blame them for that.
Yeah, so that's why I was asking where it faced. Thank you. That was it.
Commissioner Woodward, we don't disagree with you. We agree with you as well about the slippery slope, and that's why we filed it initially about these incremental increases and where does it stop. We're not disagreeing. We could agree completely, but we also are of our word, and we had said that if we reached agreement that we wouldn't go forward with the appeal. So that's where our quandary is, because we, in good faith, said that's what we were going to do, and that's what we do. But it is a big issue, and as Tom said, to put it on the radar when these things come forward as being termed a plan development, we don't respectably agree that it is a plan development. It is a 10-acre lot or 10-acre property that is zoned for 10 pieces, 10 parcels of land. It's not an increase in density. So when you're looking at whether it's only affecting 4 lots, that's as if you're going to have an increased density zoned area, not one 10-unit subdivision. So on your radar, that perhaps these items should go before a body that can flush out the merits, that can discuss it, versus one individual, zoning administrator, whomever that person is designated at the time to make that decision. That it should be better before an administrative body to flush it out and to work out the aspects versus saying it's a plan development and you go just before one person. So something to think about.
Right. And I do want to just thank everybody here for really taking the time to think about it and discuss it. It's been a great discussion. I think it's great for everybody moving forward, just for this project, not just for our own little interest. But I'm glad we had a discussion with the public.
And we hope not to be here for lot 5.
All right. All right, thank you. So at this time, if there's no further comment, let's see, public. Is there any public comment? I don't see anyone in the audience. Sue, is there anyone online?
Cheryl, you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Planning Commission. I would like to support the appellants. I think that, as Mr. Woodward said, there's actually a bigger issue here, and that is that if one walks away from today and you look at the slides that were presented, there's disagreement on what a plan development is, there's disagreement on what a CUP versus a variance is, and yet it will appear to the public that those slides are correct. As Holly Johnson just mentioned, there should be a larger administrative body that talks about plan developments. There's been several issues brought up at the Municipal Advisory Council about plan developments. Our experience with plan developments in Granite Bay has not been very good. Whitehawk's plan development, not only did they not put in as is required by the general plan, they didn't put affordable housing on site, and they will be taking out almost 1,000 oak trees. So our experience and the neighbors, there's a lot of community issue with those developments. So plan developments, we can't go back. This is already a plan development, but the fact that you will not only be looking to set precedent within that neighborhood, but for every other development that comes up, they'll point to this and they'll go, well, they did it over here. And so this is really impacting any plan development that comes up, or any development that comes up where we look at the fact that is something a CUP or is it a variance? That's a huge issue to me, and there's a lack of transparency. The people in this room are the only ones that probably know about this. It went forward in a much larger venue with an environmental report. That's the place where these things should have been discussed. They were agreed to. There's nothing new other than new requests. The architect, it appears, blew it. They knew what the parameters and constraints were for designing the house, and yet they designed something that needed to be bigger. So that shouldn't be the residents' issue. It should be dealt with, and it was dealt with in the original conditions of the property. So whether it's 2%, 5%, whatever the percentage is, it was well known and well discussed at the time. So I hope that you'll consider the larger ramifications of the minor use permit and giving the discretionary authority to a single individual for that developer to make the comment that it's not an issue, that they can easily get that changed. is disturbing. It's disturbing to residents that those types of deals can be made and made in a room with a zoning administrator and not by a larger board. This was done.
Cheryl, your 3 minutes are up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Any other public comments, Sue? Okay.
Ms. Beckler, please state your name and you'll have 3 minutes.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Amber Beckler. I live in Granite Bay. I just wanted to share the concern about this being precedent setting. And I appreciate that Holly and her husband, the appellants, came to an agreement with the Lot 4 owner. I think that is commendable. But I actually would encourage the Planning Commission to deny the original zoning administrator's decision. I just have a really hard time understanding how the owners of Lot 4 didn't know the constraints on the property, and that during the design of the house with the architect, the staff, and the applicant, how they couldn't just meet the constraints of the property. So rather than increasing to 23%, couldn't they just simply modify the house footprint to meet 20%? So I do agree it's precedent setting, and I think it's concerning. So ideally, I think the Planning Commission should actually deny the original decision by the zoning administrator. In the best case, if needed, at least modify the CUP to reflect the settlement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have other comment? Yes, we do. Okay.
Mr. Garabedian, please state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes.
Good morning, Planning Commissioners. Glad to have a chance to say a little something this morning that we have raised before in recent years. This is referred to as a pattern kind of issue. The issue we are concerned about is the county's planning practice of all too frequently changing any kind of approved planning authority, whether it's from specific plans or something like this in variances. The perspective we have is that when someone wants to take an action on their property of almost any kind that increases their property rights and their property values, and they advocate that, well, what the county will do all too often is grant those rights. And who pays for it? Whose expense is that at? It is at the expense of the neighbors. The property rights and property values of the neighbors next door are what is decreased. And the county does this over and over and over. And look what someone has to go through here to deal with the county's practice. You don't have to look too far to see what the county does and how often it does these kind of changes. And who has the wherewithal and the time and the ability to cite the legal authorities and go through this kind of effort to protect their own property from county practice, a kind of a practice that should not be so common. So we have not looked at this property, but catches our eye because someone has gone to so much time and effort to try to deal with something the county should not allow. And there's reference to creating more bureaucratic processes to try to resolve this when it's the county's problem. And we hope you will recognize that in dealing with this and do something to help curtail this kind of transfer of property value and property rights from one property owner to another because the county won't stick to its guns and stick to its plans and stick to its approvals. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other comments?
No, there are not.
Okay. With no other comments online, we will close the public comment period, bring it back to the commission for discussion. Or a motion.
Actually,
Clayton, I can see you wanting to say something.
Yes. So before you begin your deliberations, I think it's important to just, I guess, clarify where we're at in your options as a commission in terms of proceeding. And I guess after I provide these comments, if the chair is okay with it, I would like to potentially leave it open to the applicant or the appellant to let me know if I'm misstating anything.
All right.
And that is,
That's fine.
so we have an appeal that was filed. That appeal is requesting that the modification of the conditional use permit be denied, and it not be denied. It sounds like, based on the testimony and statements today by the appellant, that they are not withdrawing that appeal. So that means that is the issue still before the commission, is whether or not to allow this modification of the use permit or not. So there are a few options that this commission can take in terms of proceeding. One is you can deny that appeal and uphold the zoning administrator's decision, which was an approval of the conditional use permit modification. The other one is you can approve the appeal and deny the zoning administrator's decision or overturn the zoning administrator's decision for the conditional use permit modification. So that would basically eliminate the modification. A third option would be to approve the appeal, uphold the zoning administrator's decision of the conditional use permit modification, but subject to the conditions requested by the appellant. So all three of those are potentially in play based on where we are at this point.
All right. And the appellant, do you concur with Clayton's summary? Probably best, because this is a Zoom meeting, to put it on the microphone. Sorry.
So the way I heard it was the three options were to deny the appeal, approve the zoning administrator's decision. Sidebar. Yeah. Do you want me to repeat it? So the three options: deny the appeal and approve the zoning administrator's decision.
Right.
Second option, to approve the appeal, overturn the zoning administrator's decision.
Right.
And you had referenced the third was to approve the appeal, uphold the zoning administrator's action, and approve the conditions settlement?
Right, subject to the additional conditions that the applicant requested, or as the commission would like to modify.
So the only thing that I would question is, how can you approve the appeal and still uphold? They would seem to be on opposite ends.
Right, and that's...
So I would just say the terminology would perhaps be, well...
That's going off the way I deemed your request to be, and that you were asking for the,
so I guess I would just
modification to take place. Just one second.
Okay.
You were asking for the modification of conditional use permit, but also to allow the conditional use permit to go forward.
So I guess I would just modify the third option, which would be to approve the appeal, or you might want to take that out in that language and say, and have, based upon the modifications, that you're not going to have an approval of the zoning administrator's decision, nor would you have an approval of our appeal. It would be that you don't have to have a determination of the zoning administrator's action or of the appeal. It's based upon the settlement that you would have these conditions go forward, and as a result, you wouldn't have the appeal, you wouldn't have the approval.
Right. I understand that that's your position. In order for the commission to proceed, they would either have to approve or deny the appeal or have it withdrawn. So, and it sounds like what I've heard is that you're not withdrawing the appeal. So the options then are for the commission to either approve or deny it. Now, if they deny the appeal, there's not, the hands are tied. That goes back to the zoning administrator's decision.
So we can't deny.
If you approve it, you can approve it with conditions, though. Sorry, Chair.
Oh, really? Okay. So, but the appeal is to overturn the zoning administrator's conditions. So what you're saying is, if we approve the appeal but with conditions, basically it modifies then the zoning administrator's decision.
Right. Your approval of the appeal is basically the approval of the zoning administrator wasn't completely okay, but once you modify it to include in the recommended conditions from the appellant,
He's still right.
Then it is okay.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
What she mentioned was a fourth option, and us not to make a decision.
Right. And procedurally, the way it would work, if you don't make a decision, then it defaults back to the zoning administrator's decision. So if they're not withdrawing their appeal, you must either approve or deny.
Right. We have to take action on their request. Correct? Okay. True, you could. All right. Any other questions or discussion of the commission?
You know, reading back through this,
Is your mic on?
Oh, no, sorry. Reading back through this, according to the architect, they're still below the 20% building envelope without the patio structure. Is that correct? Am I reading that right? If they didn't,
You need to speak.
It says they're below the 20% on the original plans without the additional patio. Correct?
Right, so just the house and the garage would be below the 20%.
So the architect and the Kims know the situation. It's only about 125 square feet, I believe. That's what was in the calculations in the submittal. I kind of agree with these guys that I don't want to set that precedence for people to come back here, in my opinion. So I think that they could work within those parameters. If they still have room to build, then maybe they take 20 feet off this garage or wherever they have to take it and make it fit in that envelope. So that's why I was asking that they were still on. So that's my comment. That's
All right.
my thought.
Any other discussion? Okay. Do we have a motion then? We'll probably work with Clayton on whatever motion.
I guess we
is.
take the.
I'm glad to make a motion that this would actually be to approve the appeal and deny or overturn the zoning commissioner's decision.
Right.
So that means it stays within the 20%. Right.
Correct.
That's correct. Yeah.
So we have a motion?
I'll second that.
Okay.
And I guess
So some
that
clarification.
is the indication of the commission to approve the appeal and deny the zoning administrator's decision to modify it. I think on staff side, we would suggest or recommend that perhaps you make a tentative decision with on that approval so that staff can return with findings supporting it at the next planning commission hearing.
All right.
Because we don't currently have findings in the record for that
Correct.
action. So it would be a tentative action, and we would return at a following planning commission meeting with findings supporting of it, and
So-
then the commission could evaluate those.
So we'll bring it back on the 24th?
There's a lot of stuff on the 24th.
No, he took a bunch of stuff off the
Oh,
24th.
You could continue that to that date on the 24th to a time certain.
Okay. So is that in your motion then, that you're making a tentative recommendation for staff to come back on June 24th for the final decision?
It is now.
I would concur with him.
All right. So we have a motion and a second, and it is to uphold the appeal, deny the zoning administrator's decision, to direct the staff to come back with the appropriate findings and resolution on for the June 24th meeting. Okay. Sue, roll call, please.
I have a first from Mr. Woodward, a second from Mr. DiMattei. Could I have a vote from Mr. DiMattei, please?
Yes.
Mr. Woodward?
Yes.
Mr. Herzog?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison?
No.
And Mr. Hauge?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. I guess this is appealable. Is that correct, Clayton?
So as of right now, you have a tentative decision and a
tentative, so
continuance. So,
okay,
once that is made, then it would be appealable. But as of right now, this goes in as a continuance
All right.
with
Just
direction.
assign a time to this on the June 24th.
June 24th.
If you assign a time right now, then it'll prevent staff from having to renotice it.
Ah, what
So-
time would you recommend? Like
I would
10:01,
I would
10:05?
prefer to
10:05, I'll check with the
Okay.
planning commission clerk.
So do we need to take another roll call vote on a
10:05.
time of 10:05?
10:05.
Probably just to be clear, we're on a Zoom meeting, so.
It might be clear to just
So,
do a motion.
Don, I
for
think
it.
you
But
made the motion.
Once we
so-
have a time
Send
set,
out
I
those
think we're
legal
still.
notices.
So, council clarification, if I may. We actually voted to continue that item for findings.
Right.
Okay.
So what we're doing now is taking a vote that would be timed at 10:05 on June 24th.
So let me make a correction after checking with the planning commission clerk. We already have a timed item at 10:05. So I would put that at 10:30.
Say 10:30, okay. All right.
On June 24th.
So I believe we need a motion then to make that item time certain, 10:30, June 24th.
Yeah, that's probably the safest way to do it.
Yeah, okay. So
I move that the continued item be set for the 24th at 10:30.
Okay.
I'll second that.
So we have a first and a second. We'll take a roll call.
First from Mr. Woodward, a second from Mr. DiMattei, so a vote from Mr. DiMattei, please.
Yes.
Mr. Woodward?
Yes.
Mr. Herzog?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison?
Yes.
And Mr. Hauge?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. With that, that concludes the meeting. I adjourn the meeting.